are able to. Thank you for turning the recording on. This is Carrie Rangians in the Ann Arbor Democratic Club, and today is our November membership meeting, and the next hour or so will be our programming around kicking off the 2022 midterms with thinking about our local voter turnout and what are some of the trends across the county and in the city, the Ann Arbor area. And we have a number of experts with us today as a panel. We have the assistant clerk for the county, and we have a number of students from various student groups at the University of Michigan to talk about the ways that they've been doing outreach, registration, and then getting out the vote. We also have our board member, Ingrid Alt, who's done a lot of this work over years and will be filling in a few gaps about some Ann Arbor specific turnout information. So that is a general overview. We'll start with Ed, and then we'll have Ingrid make a couple comments, and then we'll have students introduce themselves to talk a little bit around probably 11:30 when the students will start, and then we will have time at the end for questions. As the moderator, I'll be watching the chat for questions and watching for hands, but we're going to try to do questions at the end if possible so we can hear all the content first. But if you need a clarifying question, please do ask. So Ed, please start us off.
Well, thank you very much, Carrie. I appreciate you all inviting me today, and I'm happy to be here. Yes, I know many of you, and it's nice to see a lot of you that I haven't seen in a little while. At my day job, my main role is to be the Chief Deputy Clerk, Register, and Director of Elections for Washtenaw County. I serve the public here, and I work with and for Larry Kestenbaum, the elected County Clerk Register. So, and I was asked today to present some information on voter registration and on turnout trends over the past several years in Washtenaw County and specifically in the Ann Arbor area. And what I'd like to do first is just kind of point out the good news about November 2020, which I think we're still looking at, obviously, as we look at 2022 and looking at what we learned last year and what we experienced during a record-breaking election for voter turnout. And that is that turnout among young people, specifically those 18 to 21, surpassed the turnout of all other age ranges in Washtenaw County and in the city of Ann Arbor. Voters in the city that were 18 to 21 that turned out at 88% of all registered. And that's just really an incredible figure. And, you know, historically, we know that older voters tend to turn out in higher numbers. Last November absolutely flipped that script and reverse the trend. Now, you know, whether that will continue, I think, is a very significant question. But we did witness last year voters in the city and in the county generally turning out at great numbers among the 18 to 21 demographic. Now, a huge opportunity going forward, and basically where the fall off begins, is at the age of 22 to 30. Voters in that age range vote at the lowest rates among all age ranges. So there is there's great news for particularly student voters turning out in good numbers. Where it falls off is, again, that age range 22 to 30. The county experienced quite an increase in voter registration last year. We grew at about 35% or above what we had registered in 2018. It was really quite a dramatic turnout in registration. That owes in large part, obviously, to what was going on last year and what was on the ballot. And also due to the fact that it is now significantly easier to register to vote in Michigan. As you all know, I'm sure, voters in the state adopted Proposal 18.3 back in 2018 that expanded registration options up to and on Election Day. And we've seen great utilization of that ability by voters, particularly in the city of Ann Arbor and throughout Washtenaw County and throughout the state. But it is now possible to register up to and on Election Day. It's now possible to register to vote online. And a lot of the hurdles that we had in the past have been reduced or eliminated. Now, there are certainly efforts underway to change to change the rules that we follow in administering elections, as you're all probably well aware of as well. But today, at present, it is easier to register to vote and to vote in Michigan than it has been in a great long time. You know, Michigan went from being one of the most difficult states to register to vote in to being one of the easiest, I suppose, in a matter of just a couple of years. Now, registration rates among the eligible population. We get this question quite a lot. You know, how many folks are registered to vote that are actually eligible to be registered to vote? And this is actually kind of a difficult number to pinpoint, given the fact that the citizen voting age population in Washtenaw County is actually lower than the total number of all registered voters in Washtenaw County. Now, in order to get a slightly better idea of what the rate really is, we usually consider active registered voters. And active registered voters are those that have voted within the previous 4 years, still reside here in the county. Washtenaw County is home to 2 universities with transient populations that move in and move out, and that leads to what we call some quote dead weight on the voter registration rolls. Folks register here and then they move on, and they may not update their registration, or it takes a long time for their registration to be changed if they register to vote in some other state after they've left the university, for instance. So we consider active registered voters when we look at this number, and what we can see is that in the county, considering only active registered voters, 96% of all eligible voters are actually registered today. In the city of Ann Arbor, that number is a little bit closer to 90%. So there are certainly opportunities yet, and those opportunities are particularly among voters that are younger, those that are just turning 18 or 17 and a half when they can register to vote here in the state of Michigan. And reaching them is a perennial challenge or opportunity for us. Obviously, we made a lot of headway last year, given the heightened attention on last year's election cycle, but we do see that we're starting from a good point. As we look to 2022, there are a significant number of county residents already registered to vote. The challenge and opportunity again is just reaching those that are becoming of voting age or moving into the community from elsewhere, for instance, to the university. Last year taught us a lot about how, and when I say us, I mean election administrators generally, taught us a lot about how to administer elections in a very much changing environment. There was a lot of attention paid last year, obviously, to voting by mail. In Michigan, that's using an absentee ballot. And we've kind of branded this in line with what other states enjoy, which is either early voting or strictly vote by mail systems, for instance, like the one in Oregon. But in Michigan, you are requesting an absentee ballot. You've got to submit an application to get your absentee ballot, but you can do that at any point in time up to the day prior to Election Day. And last year, of course, given how sensitive we were to health and safety, and voters didn't want to go vote at their polling location if they didn't have to, we saw record numbers of absentee ballots issued and returned. Absentee ballots accounted for about 75% of all ballots cast during the November 2020 election. And that's just a really staggering figure when you consider that prior to last year's election cycle, we were usually seeing absentee ballots account for something like 25% of all ballots cast. So election administrators have had to change the way we are running elections to account for that fact. And as we head into 2022, we expect those high rates of absentee voting to continue, but probably to abate a little bit. We're looking at the possibility of absentee ballots accounting for about 50% of all ballots cast, which means that we have to administer elections basically 2 ways. One, in which many voters are voting by mail, and 2, expecting a significant number of voters to actually come to the polls again next year. So that leads to challenges with recruiting poll workers to be able to properly staff and adequately staff polling locations, but also significant burdens on election administrators, particularly city and township clerks, that are, under a lot of stress to issue absentee ballots as quickly as they possibly can and in very large volume. So we've got to basically do it, two ways, both in person and remote, in ways that we didn't have to before. It makes it a little bit more difficult to allocate resources. Another note on turnout. So again, with the good news that the younger voters are turning out in really high numbers. The University of Michigan, actually, it was just announced earlier this week, won an award, the Michigan Collegiate Voting Challenge 2020. U of M won a 4-year award for highest voter turnout, and there were 6 awardees with various or under various categories. And of 35 participant universities, the University of Michigan again did receive this honor, and that's a huge credit to many organizations that were really encouraging turnout last year, both partisan and nonpartisan, including of course the city of Ann Arbor and Washtenaw County, but of course with significant efforts from the university and from students themselves and the various groups that were pushing for turnout. Of course, the city of Ann Arbor last year opened a satellite voting location, which was extremely successful and very popular. And I do expect, I work for the county. I don't administer the city's satellite voting location, but I understand that they will be, the city will be again using that satellite location at UMA next year. And the city clerk had let us know prior to this meeting that I believe it was about 5,000 individuals registered to vote and or requested an absentee ballot at that satellite location, which is really, again, just it's a huge number and really quite a success for that effort. There are other satellite locations across the state. Most cities and townships here in Washtenaw County, with the exception of the city of Ann Arbor, operated solely from their city or township building for reasons of mostly efficiency and lesser need, I guess. The population centers in most of the areas, most of the distinct municipalities in Washtenaw County, aren't such that satellite locations necessary. But the city of Ann Arbor was among several college towns that did open successful satellite voting locations. Every municipality in Washtenaw County and really in fact across the state added absent voter ballot drop boxes to try to make that process easier, and we'll be continuing to encourage and help fund as much as we can the use of absent voter drop boxes to be able to facilitate easier voting by mail. So I was also asked, and I see I'm coming up on my 20 minutes, so I'll try to brush through or breeze through a couple more points. I was asked to try to discuss some other challenges as we look at 2020, and identified one, and that's trying to administer elections 2 ways. But the other thing that we're really having to focus on right now as a community of election administrators is misinformation, and we are expecting the trend that we saw last year to continue in 2020. And we've basically had to become, in many ways, both educators as well as election administrators. And this is sort of a different role than many of us have had to occupy in the past. We're used to doing our jobs head down, playing the referee and administering elections fairly and safely and securely. We're now, seeing just such a dramatic need for us to be in front of, quite frankly, false, misleading, lies that are circulating among, folks on social media and in traditional media even, and conspiracy theories that are being, bandied about without any regard to what's actually true. We have got, as a community of election administrators, to have a sort of singular, clear, and concise message to voters. But that is really, a challenge for us folks that don't have quite the same megaphone that folks have that are spreading this misinformation. So we're very much actively trying to build our networks and partnerships among community organizations, among political parties, and various other groups to try to have a cohesive message to share to voters and a way to share it as quickly as possible. So we'll certainly be looking for partnership from this group as well as others as we look at 2022 and roll out our voter education and community outreach efforts. So with that, I'll stand aside and I'm certainly open to and I welcome questions that you all have, and maybe if you want to provide those later on, that would sound good to me. And thanks again for the opportunity to be here today and to address you all.
Thank you so much, Ed. That was a lot of great information. In case anybody isn't aware of the acronym UMA, it's the University of Michigan Museum of Art. So it's on State Street and right downtown near campus. And the city clerk of Ann Arbor said that they are aiming to do that again in 22. And they do want to do a North Campus based same day voter reg activity, like have a space there on North Campus. Something that she sent over as kind of background information too was that the same day registration was happening for 40 days before the November general election, and that the highest day of that same day kind of remote registration there was the 15th day before the election, because within the last 14 days, there's additional residency requirements in order, documents that you have to show. Is that accurate, Ed? Is there anything else you'd want to add to those comments?
Yeah, that's accurate. So you can register up to 8 p.m. on election day, but if you register within that 14-day window, you do have to show a residency credential that you would not otherwise have to if you registered up to the 15th day. So the residency credential can be satisfied with something like a bank statement, a utility bill, some quote government document that has your name and address on it, but it does add that one additional hurdle that voters have to climb over. So yeah, registering as early in the process is really important. It's also important on the administration side of things. If folks are registering sooner in the process, that gives the staff that are actually processing all of this registration paperwork the ability to do that in a way that's a little bit more streamlined and doesn't overwhelm them.
Mm-hmm. And the city clerk for Ann Arbor, she really credited a number of student groups, probably some that we'll be hearing from in a few minutes, as well as intra-campus competitions, actually, to get that student turnout out. But that was for the general election. That was not for the primary in March, the presidential primary in March, the other primary in August, and if there were other elections in May. So she really gave content, and most of her comments were about the November 2020 general election. Do you have anything else you'd want to add, Ed, about any of those other kinds of primary type turnouts?
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly turnout is not what we would like to see during primary elections. The March presidential primary election was an exception to that, but state primaries like the one we'll hold in August next year typically see turnout only around 35 to 40%. And trying to find opportunities and get over the hurdle of reaching voters during that time period when they're not as likely to vote for whatever reason is definitely a challenge for us next year.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have Ingrid Alt, who has presented to this group before about some voter turnout trends within the city of Ann Arbor. So we're just going to revisit a couple slides and talk about trends among the wards in the city, and then we'll move to Mia and the students from Flip Blue and the College Dems. So Ingrid, go ahead.
Hi there. Thanks for having me. I'm Ingrid Alt. Can you see my screen there?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, so this is part of a presentation that I put together back in January, where I talked about voter participation for the presidential election. And Ed, I'm going to say that this is based upon the results that I pulled directly from your website. And what I find really interesting about voter participation in the wards in Ann Arbor, this shows the participation of people who actually voted who were registered. And you can see that this is by ward. Ward 1, which is where I live, has pretty dismal participation. The best ward that has participation is Ward 5 at 65%. Why I think this is really interesting is because in this next slide, what I did is a comparison between the turnout of 2008 and 2005, and what we saw was there's very little difference. In that we had a overall turnout of 59.6 versus a turnout of 59.44. And these were the comparisons again that I pulled from the county website. So when everybody talks about the voter turnout, we don't see it in Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor is pretty stagnant, which is where I think the Ann Arbor Democrats really have some work to do. The other thing I really thought was interesting was in the city of Ypsilanti, for that particular, in 2020. Ward 1, which is where Lois Richardson, the current mayor, lives, she saw dramatic differences in her ward. So I think there's something to be considered there. Why is that? You know, what did she do that made a real difference in her community? And I think part of that is that she is very engaged with her community. That's just my thought. I also want to just flip back to Ward 5 versus Ward 1. And what are the differences between Ward 5 and all the others? And why do we have greater participation in one ward versus another ward? And I think Ward 5A is, for one thing, it's a little smaller, it's a little more dense, so it feels more community driven. And they do community events, and there's more of a sense of small, and I think small matters. And we did see that in voter turnout in Washtenaw County. In the smaller, more dense communities, you had much higher turnout. And we did see that when we looked at the townships, where we saw the smaller the township, and I'm not going to go through the whole presentation, but the smaller the township, the higher. I mean, you can see the tiny townships. These show you the amount of people who live in them and the high percentage rates. And then the ones that we saw that had large populations, you had much smaller dramatic changes. And the one that I want to note that Ed and Larry, well, Larry and I mostly have talked about this, is Pittsfield Township, where they've had huge increases. And there's going to be major redistricting done there. And they've had such low that was the lowest voter turnout was in Pittsfield Township. And I think it's because there's very little engagement there, because there's whole populations of new people moving in where there's, there's not that community connection. So those are my thoughts on voter turnout, and why I think where we might start having some conversations in Ann Arbor for the population at whole. And I will turn it over to the students who know a whole lot more about their population than I do.
Thank you, Ingrid, for sharing that. And the numbers that you were sharing were all pre-2018 statewide ballot initiatives, correct? So those did not include information with the high absentee ballot rate. Is that correct?
Well, some of those were 2008 versus 2020.
Oh, okay, great.
And then, the other thing I want to also note was that at the latest election we had, which had the 4 proposals, we only had a 16.7% turnout. So, I mean, it also depends on, what we're voting for. And again, in Ann Arbor, so many small percentages of the population determine major ballot initiatives and who's on city council, because a lot of races are determined in August.
Thank you, Ingrid. All right. Well, Ethan is a board member of ours, involved with Flip Blue and College Dems, and Mia is also involved with Flip Blue. So I'll let you two introduce yourselves in the panel, and then we'd love to hear your thoughts about the work you've been doing in the last year, a couple years around student engagement registration. How do you get students to be convinced to register and then also to turn out to vote? So Mia, do you want to start, or Ethan? Go ahead, Ethan, thanks.
Yeah, I can start. Hi, everybody. For those that don't know me, I'm Ethan. Like Carrie said, I'm on the board of AADP, but I'm also on the board of an organization called Flip Blue. And so this is an organization on U of M's campus that tries to, get students to go out to vote for Democrats. It started last election cycle as Students for Biden. And I'll let some other members speak more about this, but we had a really good, we had great success turning out students, increasing the voting rate here on campus. And so we wanted to leverage that into working for races beyond. So this semester, we've primarily been focused on registering voters before the elections this past November, and then also petitions to get Governor Whitmer on the ballot. That's what we've been knee deep in that for the past couple of weeks, and Andrew can definitely speak a lot on that. So going into next year, we're still going to be registering voters, stuff like that, getting the word out. We're going to be working directly with the Whitmer campaign. And then we're going to be doing some other campaigns, probably like Alyssa Slotkin's campaign, things like that. So I can hand it over. We have 4 other board members here, so I can hand it over to Mia first to speak about voter registration efforts before everybody else jumps in.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mia. I'm also on the board of Flip Blue. So I am the chair of campus engagement, and I mainly lead our voter registration efforts. We've been going out on the diag at U of M every week trying to get voters registered. And I would say the main issues we're seeing with students wanting to get registered to vote in the first place, or if they are registered, go and actually turn out to vote, is one, laziness. I would say is one thing. Students just don't see the importance of it and don't really want to take the time to go out and vote. And that kind of ties in with them thinking their vote doesn't really matter in the big picture, which of course we know every single vote does matter. And a lot of races come down to just a few votes. And another thing that we're seeing a lot is students considering themselves to be apolitical, which is something our group is trying to solve on our campus by providing a space for people who feel politically homeless and don't feel that they fit into necessarily one party or the other, and don't really know where they fall on the spectrum. So we're trying to provide a space where students who fall into that area can come and speak and get involved in political discourse, and also get involved in our organizing efforts. And I guess a last thing is that a lot of students don't see the importance of elections that are not presidential elections. So I think that's another thing that we're trying to focus on right now, especially with getting Whitmer back on the ballot.
All right, so Ethan or Mia, do you want to call on the other folks on your team as we go along with the other comments? I know Andrew was mentioned as doing some of the petitioning for Governor Whitmer to get back on the ballot. Do you want to go next? And then you can call on the next person. Thanks.
Yeah, Andrew can take it.
Awesome. Okay, sounds good. Well, nice to meet everyone. I'm Andrew Schaeffler. I'm also on the board of Flip Blue. And I guess two things we can hit on. The first was what Ed talked about in terms of the UMA and all of the early voting and efforts on campus. I think that was really phenomenal overall, especially having that site set up because for Students for Biden, which all of us were involved in, and which is what was the precursor to Flip Blue. It was both super convenient, but really nice, for students as a whole. I think with all of us, and then with the founding of Students for Biden as well, we saw that there was a really massive hole for voter registration, getting people engaged, especially on the Democratic side of things. And so it was really great to have those, to have all of those resources, and we could literally direct students, just walk 100 feet, over to the UMA. So that was really good, and it was definitely, I think, the ease of that really helped with just getting students to turn out. And I think that by bringing that back, that will be super beneficial. So I guess just sort of that on the 2020 front. And I know obviously both Kenny and Adam were some of the founding members of Students for Biden. And I guess so they'll have more on that. And in terms of some of the other things that we're doing with Whitmer's campaign, we've been pretty much 100% been working with the campaign, sort of, one of the main initiatives of Flip Blue, putting that together. And so, we're really, really excited for that. And the main thing that we've been doing is, just getting petitions signed for her, as I'm sure everyone knows, and everyone who's probably signed a petition, the 15,000 signatures, but in of huge importance, this past week we've been doing a competition with the Michigan State College Dems, our group versus them, to see who gets more signatures, and whoever gets more will get a campus visit from either the governor or lieutenant governor. So that's very exciting on that front, and so that's going to be a vast majority of the work that we're going to be doing in the upcoming year. And I guess just one other thing I'll speak to on that is I think that in terms of what I've seen with voter registration and really just students in general, students just unfortunately generally are not particularly excited about the off-year elections, but when it comes to these candidates, especially Governor Whitmer, I think we're seeing a lot more excitement. We had our sort of both kickoff for the program, but also hype up for the petitions on Monday, and we had great crowd, great turnout, and so regardless, I think that that's a really exciting sign of things ahead, and also that students are engaged and excited, and there's still a ton of work that we're going to be doing and that we need to do, but it's a positive step going forward. So I guess between Kenny or Adam, whichever one of you guys wants to hit the ground running and talk about whatever.
Yeah, so I'll go first. Thanks, Andrew. So I'm Adam. I am co-president and co-founder of Flip Blue. So a little bit more, you heard a little about Flip Blue. So essentially, it's just filling that gap in what previously existed in a lack of political organizing on campus, and continuing the momentum among students that we had from the Biden campaign, continuing that in the future elections. So I already talked a little about voter registration. I just want to go specifically into what we've been doing this semester and a few statistics. So every week we've been on the diag with a table set up, asking students, are you registered to vote in Michigan? Getting them registered if they're from out of state, making sure that they're re-registering to Michigan, unless they're from like a handful of states, or we're not going to bother them too much. And then what we've seen is we're well over 100 registered students so far this semester. If I was not counting at the beginning, so I wish I was, but I think we're around 120. I have a stack here of about 40. This is all from the last week and a half or so. I didn't make it to the city clerk yet, but I will soon. So what we're really experiencing is previously on this campus, before Flip Blue existed, you maybe had, particularly on these off years, quote unquote off years, you had like a table set up once a semester, maybe on National Voter Registration Day. And that was kind of the only opportunity students who are not really engaged in politics had to register. But what Flip Blue is doing is that we're saying that there is a benefit to having that table set up once a week, maybe once every other week, so that students who are not involved in politics, they're on their way to like an English class. They're not thinking about politics every day, but they're forced to walk by that table. It says, are you registered to vote? And then we're capturing them that way. And it's not just right before the big election in 2020, 2022. We're doing it in 2021. We're making sure that there's an election, helping you so that you know where to go to vote. But of course, as Mia said, there is a little bit of a gap. Students couldn't really get excited about the ballot props in this last election. But that's something that we're working towards, so that hopefully in 2023, if there are more ballot props 2023, that people will be out to vote for those. So we're going to continue doing some canvassing, continuing setting up tables in the diag so that we're able to capture students who maybe in previous years weren't being captured because there wasn't an organization like us that was making sure that it's foot on the gas no matter when the election is, what the election is. So I'm going to pass it off to Kenny.
Hi guys, as Adam said, I'm the other co-founder, another co-president of Flip Blue. I want to talk briefly about some of our programming because I think that's really what the energy momentum behind Flip Blue is, and it's why we're able to be so successful. A couple of things we've done. First, I noticed Jason Morgan's on the call. We actually invited him as well as lots of other speakers to come talk to our membership. We're having that called District Dialogues. Tonight, I'm really proud to share that we have Dana Nessel coming to campus to meet with some of our members. She'll be there in person, which is really exciting. We've had State Senator Jeff Irwin come as well. We have State Representative Yusuf Rabi coming, and we hope to get lots of other folks as well who are able to engage with our students on campus. We're also planning on having events about summer internships, being able to engage in resume building and trying to promote different skill sets. And also, I think the key idea about having these events is that they do three things. First is that it's really critical to building skills. The fact that we are having phone calls and being able to engage on campus means that the people that we are cultivating as members are going to be more effective when they're out organizing. Secondly, is that it boosts energy because it gets people, informed about politics, trying to engage in the actual political community that we have in Ann Arbor. And so by exposing them to those different components of politics that aren't always, go, 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 we're tabling, we're trying to register voters, it really builds some of that energy. And lastly, is that it builds community because you're not going to be able to effectively organize and get these results that we really hope to see, boosting turnout, trying to get more student ballots, by just having an event every once in a while. So by having these constant events, constant programming really have this sort of three-pronged approach to improving organizing. And I mean, I think the key to our success is that we have so many events going on. I mean, over the past 2 weeks, we had an event, I think, almost every other day. And that just, I think, speaks to the diligence and energy that we have in Flip Blue, but also the fact that we really want to engage students on campus.
Well, thank you so much. Perfect timing here. I was trying to leave about 20 minutes for questions, and so we do have about 20 minutes. Just a couple comments for folks as a reminder. So we are the Ann Arbor Democratic Club. Flip Blue is obviously partisan, but I just want to remind folks that Ed is actually nonpartisan in his day job and is here as like a county elections expert. So Ed is not really here to help us with strategy as a club. So if we're talking strategy questions, we should be directing those toward the groups that are partisan, but Ed is not here as a partisan person. So I'd love to take some questions. Folks can add them in the chat box or use the raise hand function. And I see we have a question, Zachary.
Oh, hello. I'm kind of new to Zoom. Y'all might know me as Island Monster, and I just want to express my appreciation to Flip Blue and your efforts in the last election. I was out there a few days trying to direct people to UMA as well. So I've continued talking to students on campus, one, because I'm a renter and I'm really involved in city elections. So I want to try to get more students involved in that. And just one thing that I found out that was concerning to me was that a lot of leases in Ann Arbor start like at the end of August. And so that made me wonder, that may pose a lot of difficulties for students to vote in primaries in the first week of August. So I was just wondering if there was any solutions to that. So, yeah.
Thank you, Zachary. Anybody from Flip Blue want to talk about what you might have heard from students about that? Or Ed, I see you unmuted, so please, Ed.
Well, I was just going to point out that, so in Michigan, you can vote at your previous polling location or where you were previously registered up to 60 days after you complete a move. So if you haven't yet updated your registration, it is still possible to vote where you were registered, again, up to 60 days beyond. And then again, because we now have election day registration, if someone needed to update their registration suddenly, didn't realize that they hadn't done it yet, they can do that on election day and receive a ballot at the location they now reside in.
Yeah, I would just say definitely echoing all of Ed's sentiments. And I think a few things too work in our favor for that. First off is that for just in general, for the primary election, since they're at the beginning of August, a lot of students aren't here anyway, which is not particularly a good thing, but it's a good thing in the sense that, there's no like, complicated re-registration, or like, if someone is, at a house over the summer and then, moves or something like that. So I think that works in our favor. And then also to the sense that, leading up to the election, there's, a combination of a lot more efforts by groups like ours, general election. There's a lot of more efforts of groups like ours, and then also the sense that there's more motivation and excitement to register. So I think that was in at least in 2020 we noticed that as somewhat of an issue, but a lot of the times it was just people saying, hey, like I just need to re-register at my new address. Can I do that? And we were of course like absolutely.
So thinking about this August situation for students who are in residence halls, thinking about what Ed said about the youngest demographic is where we're trying to register folks, and that tends to be the first year students. And so how, for a student who's in a residence hall who must move out by whatever it is in April or May, they might have registered while they were on campus as a student that academic year, and then they might leave for the summer and come back and move somewhere at the end of August. So they've moved twice now. So what is the, and it's longer than 60 days. What's the situation there, the recommendation? Should folks just stay registered at their residence hall and then ask for a mail ballot to the residence hall that will then get redirected to their summer location? It just sounds like a lot of.
That's my opinion.
Yeah, I lived in the residence hall and then changed my address before voting last election to reflect where I was living as a sophomore. It was really like a very kind of painful process. I don't know what the answer is. I didn't vote in the August primary. For the city, I did vote in Michigan's primary in March. So like I can't speak specifically about like voting for like the August primary and then moving into November. But I do think there should be like some form of where University of Michigan students can seamlessly change from residence hall to a secondary address, because I know like when I went to vote, I kind of assumed that I could just vote with my old address, but that wasn't the case. I had to bring like proof of residency. So I had to bring something from my current apartment building. And if I had tried to go and vote like at my dorm precinct location, for example, I would have gotten turned away. So that's something I think like, we can do like on campus to even inform students about that, like, look, going into next year, freshmen, if you're a freshman last year, that's where you registered, or where we registered you last year, you're going to have to change that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and part of the reason I'm bringing this up is because with redistricting, the August primary this coming August in 22 might actually have a few competitive races for state house, state senate, something like that. So students really could have an impact in those races. So that's why I'm bringing it up. Any other comments on this August primary thing before I call on Councilmember Griswold?
Yeah, I actually have a quick question. Is there any movement to get the August primary changed?
That's an Ed question.
Yes, there is. There are, I believe, at least two bills right now that have been proposed that would change the date of the primary. Seems like the most viable option would be to push it into to May, which, from an election administrator's standpoint would be wonderful news. Having a longer runway in between administering a primary to the general election would be great from that standpoint. There's still, there's a hurdle there. The Constitution of the state actually allows for the legislature to place a ballot proposal on a general election ballot up until the date usually falls the first week of September. So there's always this, waiting period where we're not really ready to, print ballots, deliver ballots to clerk's offices to then issue to, vote by mail voters. There's always kind of this, compressed timeline for all of that. And this wouldn't change that issue. But yes, there are efforts right now that would change the date of the primary.
Thank you. Councilmember Griswold, you have your hand up.
Yes, first I want to recognize a couple of phrases that Mia used. I haven't heard them before and I really liked them. One was politically homeless. And the other one was where someone falls on the spectrum. So both of those have a sense of importance and urgency, so I could see where they would get a student's attention. I was interviewed a couple of days ago by a Michigan Daily reporter about changing the requirement that we have pie-shaped wards. And I know that there are some students as well as some Democrats who are working on that. I've been told that the requirement to put in pie-shaped wedges was actually Republican gerrymandering. So that's another sort of inflammatory term. And I have agreed to bring that forward to City Council if there is serious interest in that. And so I'm wondering from a student perspective, if you feel that having more flexibility in the shape of the wards, and it wouldn't be determined until 2030, but do you believe that the shape of the wards right now sort of hinders student interest and involvement in local politics because you really don't have a strong voice? I don't know. Do any of the students want to comment on that, or is it something you're not really that aware of?
No, this is something, I think we've actually had conversations with you and somebody at the Washtenaw County Democratic Party about this.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I do think it would benefit students to be able to have a district in Ann Arbor that is centered on campus. At least from my perspective, and I'm not going to speak for like Andrew or Mia or anything else. I think U of M brings a lot to Ann Arbor. And so much of that is the students. It keeps the city young, keeps it moving, things like that. Always like, pushing forward. And I think like a student-centered district would add a lot, would add a good perspective to City Council. There's been the same debate going on about like, should students have a seat on the Board of Regents for the university? Increasing student representation, because a lot of people do have a lot of great ideas that some city council members might might not be thinking about, like, okay, how does this impact the 18 to 22 year olds that come and go? I don't know, like specifically, students probably don't know very much about the wards. I know I don't know a whole lot about the wards. Like when I was in South Quad freshman year, which is a different ward from what I was voting in now, and I like didn't think really about like which ward I was in. It just kind of like changed, and I was like, oh, that's kind of weird that it changed. Now, I do know the pie shape stuff, but most students don't. So it would take a lot of like getting information out to students about that, but I think it would be something that could catch on.
So, okay, thanks.
Thanks, Ethan. Jessica, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks everybody for being here and talking through this. I'm curious whether there's a way to look at voter turnout by separating it into demographics. So example, a town versus gown voter turnout, right? Because I'm hearing the struggles from our students saying, you can get registered, and we have all these efforts to register students, but then they maybe can't or don't vote for a variety of reasons. So does that make our turnout look, I don't think artificial is the right word, but artificially low compared to permanent resident turnout?
Student turnout, and Andrew could correct me if I'm wrong, I think student turnout was like 80% plus. So it was, it was really good. It was a big increase from 2016. I think the issue with that is that probably is a bit artificial because Donald Trump was on the ballot, and that definitely did motivate a crap ton of students to go vote. And so if, next in 2022, that's going to be how do you get students to get motivated when like there's no demon on the ballot basically, and then if he doesn't run in 2024, so how do you keep that momentum? But there is a lot of positive stuff going on campus, even outside of the partisan efforts to get students registered. I think U of M has done a pretty good job with like getting the word out that people should go vote.
Excellent, thank you. I have another question, but it's not student related, so I'll hold that one until we're done.
Ed, are you hoping to comment in reply to Jessica?
I was just going to maybe point out that, yes, it's possible to study, turnout in, I guess, related ways. You could request data and analyze it. Basically, lists of voters for a particular election, and try to analyze where those voters live specifically, and perhaps how long they've been registered, to focus in on your question.
Okay, thanks, Ed. Councilmember Griswold, did you have another question? Okay, it looks like Jessica, go ahead and ask your second question.
Yeah, thank you. So when we were looking at the maps ward by ward of turnout, Ward 5 had some of the highest turnout, but I know that that also then results in Ward 5 being prioritized in terms of canvassing and door knocking because they have high turnout. So do we have a sense of how much that's just, it replicates itself, right? It turns out, so it gets attention, so it turns out more?
That's a good question. Ingrid, do you have any comments on that, since you were talking about the ward turnout? I think what Ingrid had said during her comments was related to more density and people feeling more like a community. So that could have something to do with it, but the kind of self-fulfilling prophecy question here. Ingrid, what comments would you have to add to that?
I'm sorry, I was busy lowering people's hands. I didn't hear the question. What was that, Jessica?
Oh, I
No
was referring back to your slide where you show how, comparatively high the turnout is in Ward 5. And I think folks who do a lot of field organizing tend to know that. And so if you have limited time or limited door knockers, you focus in Ward 5. And so I'm wondering whether anything you've come across or other folks have come across suggests that their turnout is high, so they get more attention, which drives more turnout.
Oh, that's a good question. I've done door knocking in all wards except 5. So I don't really know how to answer that. I'm really of the feeling that the data that I presented really shows that the more there's a sense of community, the better you have a turnout. The more people talk among each other and the more they support one another, the better you have results in getting people to remind one another to go vote. Did you go vote? One of the things that I think we can say is yard signs don't necessarily tell you if somebody's going to win, but encouraging your neighbor, your friends, and telling everybody, have you voted? That does help. That's my best guess. I think there's a real sense of community in Ward 5 more so. They do a lot of community activities in Ward 5 more so than they do in other wards. That's my
Interesting.
sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Ingrid. Good question.
Jessica, can I chime in?
Yes, please.
Okay, so as somebody who has looked at this from a lot of from a state legislative and a federal campaign perspective, I think that there's probably truth to all of these reasons, right? Like Ward 5 gets a lot of attention and there's a lot of community, but also like logistically, the doors are very easy to knock in Ward 5. The houses are close together. There's not a lot of hills. There's not a lot of ruralness as like when you get farther out in some of the other wards. And so I think it's probably all of these factors. I'd be interested to see if there is a way to measure, like if somebody focused on another ward, did they really have like fruits to that effort? But I think it's probably a combination.
This is a really interesting question. I wonder, the Flip Blue team, you talked about folks having summer internships. It might be an interesting question for a summer intern this summer ahead of the primary to actually maybe intern with the Ann Arbor Dems and look at this question perhaps as your summer internship and come up with some recommendations at the end as an example of something that could be kind of helping a student gain some skills, do that analytic thinking, and have a product at the end, which is recommendations on maybe how to increase turnout among the city residents in the different wards. I've personally have hosted interns for a variety of things over the years, so I could work with the Ann Arbor Dems e-board and we could figure out a way to possibly make that work. But let's talk more about that as a possible summer internship for a Flip Blue student if they're interested in that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, just keep us in the loop.
Great. So we do only have a minute or two left. Any final questions, comments? I think this was really good for us to start. We got a bunch of information for us to put in our brains, think about, and then start strategizing for 2022 locally. Jason Morgan, Commissioner Morgan, let's hear your question.
Thanks, Carrie. Really just a huge appreciation for the students. I had the opportunity to speak with some of them and they were great. The one thing I do want to flag is that we will likely have competitive districts in Washtenaw County in the State House, and for the first time in a very long time here in Washtenaw County, based on these new maps. And so I think it's going to be more important than ever that, yes, we do increase that turnout in Ann Arbor and in the county as a whole, but we're going to have a lot of districts or multiple districts touching Ann Arbor and the surrounding areas. So I think there's going to be a huge opportunity more than ever for student involvement in this next cycle in 2022, and it could make a huge difference. So very excited that they are so engaged and involved and here. So thank you all. Thanks, Carrie.
Great point, Commissioner Morgan. All right, with that, I think we can stop the recording and close out for the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you to everyone who came today to share